This is the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast, episode 33. Are these tools in your toolbox? A constructed wetland. I'm Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason. We'll begin by discussing constructed wetlands with Jill Costell. She's the Senior Environmental Engineer at the Wetlands Initiative. I asked her to tell me a little bit about the constructed wetland.
Well, a constructed wetland is an engineered ecosystem designed to optimize, if you would, the specific wetland characteristics and functions that improve water quality. And they're usually located on the edge of fields, so they can be positioned to intercept the tile main before it outlets into a creek or ditch.
Can you define the difference between a wetland restoration and a constructed wetland?
Yeah, wetland restoration applies to natural wetland sites that had hydric soils that have been disturbed or degraded in some manner. Whereas a constructed wetland does not have to be built on former wetland areas. They can be, but it's not necessary. And the design goal, as I mentioned, of a constructed wetland is water quality improvement. And I should say all wetlands provide water quality benefit. But with the constructed wetlands, we're really trying to optimize those natural processes that remove nitrogen and phosphorus.
If a farmer puts in a constructed wetland and then decides to take it out later, what are the obstacles to doing that?
Well, these wetlands will work for a very long time. So while we would like them to remain on the landscape forever, they do not have to be permanent wetlands. And since the wetland hydrology is a function of the design, once the hydrology aspect is removed, it will cease to be a wetland. So if we reroute the tile around the wetland, there will no longer be any water going into that wetland. Therefore, you're kind of losing the hydrology aspect. So therefore, they should not be regulated or should not be considered for compensatory mitigation. I do encourage landowners to get an Army Corps nationwide permit 27, which is when you either install a wetland on the Farm Bill program or not. It allows reversion at the end of the practice agreement. And it's just a document that states the prior condition and should allow for this reversion, whether it's restored, enhanced, or established on prior converted or uplands. But I think the biggest obstacle is finding the soil to fill in the excavated area.
What are the benefits of having a constructed wetland for nitrogen, for phosphorus retention, wildlife habitat, soil health, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so it's a very efficient and practical way of removing nitrogen and phosphorus from the tile drainage water, because that's what it's been designed for and that's what it's going to do. And it's a known technology, if you want to put it in that parlance. So we know they're effective and they're going to work. But the nice thing about a wetland is, whether it's constructed or restored, you're going to bring wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat, water storage, carbon storage, along with the water quality improvement.
So what are the challenges that you might face once you have this constructed wetland? And I'm thinking of things like, mosquitoes because of water hanging around, getting the correct plant species, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think, in the wetland, you don't have standing water. The water is always slowly moving for it. So mosquitoes are no bigger of a problem than the nearby stream or ditch. But I think one of the biggest challenges, and I don't really think it's a challenge, it's more just you have to recognize there's some management, is that in the first 2 years to promote the wetland plant community, you're going to have to manage the water levels with the water control structure. But after that, the plant community can really reestablish itself year after year with no water management. You just kind of set your boards and forget that. And the plants selected should be emergent plants, marsh plants that can tolerate high nitrogen levels and withstand varying water levels, because sometimes, we get a rain event, you may get more water in there, and during the summertime it will lower down as we get less rain precipitation and flow coming through those tiles. But if you follow the NRCS standard, those are the plants they selected, the ones that are most tolerant to those conditions. And other than that, I think because, you built it, wetland wildlife will find it. So you're going to have to work with nature's landscapers and architects and engineers, which are the muskrats and the beavers. So you're just going to have to work with nature and kind of manage their presence at the same time.
Speaking of them, they cost money. I'm wondering what the cost share opportunities might be for farmers who are thinking that they would consider a constructed wetland.
Yeah, so there's financial assistance available through the Conservation Reserve Program. It is CP 39, which is under the continuous CRP sign-up, so you can roll at any time. The other available Farm Bill program is the EQIP, and here it's Conservation Practice 656. And in Illinois, constructed wetlands are one of a handful of higher priority EQIP practices, which means cost share can be up to 90%. And obviously there's other private conservation foundations, such as the Wetlands Initiative, which are also willing to help with cost share.
Jill Costell is a senior environmental engineer at the Wetlands Initiative. Now let's turn our attention to Maria Lemke. She's a director of conservation for the state of Illinois at the Nature Conservancy. I wondered when I began talking with her why it was that TNC, the Nature Conservancy, was interested in agriculture.
So a lot of what I do is study the process of restoring floodplain wetlands along the Illinois River, but also a lot of the work over the last 18 years is understanding how small wetlands and other practices work to reduce excess nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from drainage tiles from agricultural systems. And the history of the Conservancy's agricultural work really goes back to the early 90s when, the Conservancy here in Illinois first got into really wanting to better understand freshwater systems, mostly been terrestrial focused before then. And the Mackinac River watershed is where we've been focusing a lot of our work for the last 20 years or so. And that was selected by the Conservancy based on its status as a high-quality river. It sustains high numbers of fish and mussel species, has a lot of high-quality stream habitat in the river system itself. And so early on, the Conservancy worked with stakeholders and partners in that watershed to put together this Mackinac River Watershed Management Plan. It was a huge effort, volunteer effort with all these different stakeholders and partners. That was completed in 98. The plan's a huge plan, but, really identified strategies to reduce detrimental impacts to the watershed from both urban and agricultural sources. Since 75% or more, even in the tributaries, more like 95% of the land is used for agriculture, that's kind of where the Conservancy started focusing on how to address stresses associated with agricultural land use in the watershed.
Given that relatively long history, are constructed wetlands very efficient?
Yes, they are. We just completed a 12-year data set on some constructed wetlands that we installed on some private land near Lexington, Illinois. We call it the Research and Demonstration Farm. It's owned by the Franklin family. It's been in their family for generations. And we just completed a 12-year study there. Our main goal was to look at not only how effective wetlands are, but really how big the wetlands need to be relative to the tile drained area that's flowing into them to be effective. So we're focused on these small constructed wetlands that are installed at the edge of the fields, but they're really designed specifically to treat tile water, not the surface water runoff. And so that's what we were measuring at the farm.
And were they effective?
Yeah, they are very effective at removing dissolved forms of nitrogen, like nitrate, nitrogen that flow through the tiles. Specifically, too, we found they removed 50 to 90% of the dissolved phosphorus coming through the tiles, averaged over this 12-year period. So, yes, we believe that they can be a very effective method to treat nutrients from tile drainage systems.
Are they very good at working with the larger flushes of rainfall that we're experiencing as the climate has changed and the events have gotten bigger?
Yeah. During really high rain events, these, of course, the retention time in these wetlands is going to be much reduced. They're not huge wetland systems. They're small wetland systems at the edge of fields. During these big high events, probably not holding a lot of water and giving it enough retention time to reduce a lot of the runoff through the tiles. So this is where, wetland design can come in. Some of the things we've looked at is designing these wetlands with an S kind of design where the water has to travel in a flowing pattern that takes it through the wetland slower, or putting in kind of these deeper areas in the wetland that can hold more water. So there's ways to address, the future predicted increases in rain events. But secondly, wetlands, as effective as they are, they're one piece of the solution. So there's other, combining infield and edge of field practices, cover crops or different tillage practices, grassed waterways, things like that slow off the water to begin with that come into the wetlands. It's really like a package deal. You really need these kind of bundled or stacked practices to really address, the future predicted increases in rainfall.
If there's going to be more water standing in these areas, can algae blooms form in the wetlands?
Oh yeah. Algae blooms certainly form in the wetlands, and you'd expect that because you're slowing down the water that's coming through the tile that has a lot of nutrients in it, and that's what happens when you slow down, water with high nutrients is you get algal blooms, and that causes problems if it's a drinking reservoir or, the Gulf of Mexico. In wetlands, it's really in these wetlands we don't see it as an issue. In fact, that's what we expect to happen. A lot of the issues with high algae blooms is that you end up with an oxygen deficit, right? When the algae starts decomposing, it sucks up the oxygen. You could get fish kills, things like that, or taste and odor issues if it's drinking water. But this is not the case here. These wetlands aren't permanent. They dry up in the summer. They typically don't sustain, fish populations anyway. And so, it's not a problem. That's what we would expect. But I'll tell you one thing we have done is because of the algae, as we've developed, working with University of Illinois, actually developed these algae guards, we call them, that go around the outlet of the wetland. So, the outlets have these animal guards, and high algae can clog those up, and then the water starts filling up in the wetland and maybe overflows the spillway. So these algae guards kind of filter that, keep the algae from clogging that up, and they've been really effective. So that's one thing that we would recommend putting in these small wetlands is installing that kind of algae guard as well.
You mentioned that the wetlands can dry out. What happens during drought?
Well, that's a really good question. And over the 12 years that we studied those farm wetlands, we had, like, the 2012 drought was a big one, and a couple of other smaller droughts. Really, it doesn't really reduce their overall effectiveness at all. In fact, any water that flows into the wetlands, the wetlands retain that water, and it either evaporates or it's taken up by plants or it slowly seeps, through the sediments into the groundwater system. And these constructed wetlands, being that they're tile fed, again, they're usually dry in the summer anyway when most of these droughts would occur. And we found that the highest, they tend to have the highest efficiencies for nutrient removal in the spring, March, April, May, June, when the tiles are flowing and they're really high in nutrients. And typically, even in a drought year, you're going to have some flow during that spring. So droughts are not an issue at all, I wouldn't say, with these wetlands. They work really well when they're needed, and that's when the tiles are flowing.
What have you and the farmers who have helped put these in place learned about adopting practices to get the best experience out of a constructed wetland?
So we have, over the years, constructed over 20 different wetlands in and around the Mackinac River watershed. We've had a lot of different experiences. I would say I think it's critical to work with, your county soil and water conservation district and your NRCS in the county to install these wetlands. They have engineers that come out and design the wetlands. They can inspect the soil. The soils have to be a certain quality for wetlands. They have to have enough clay content, things like that, to even install wetlands in the first place. So they know how to do all this stuff. That's what they do. I would not try to do it on your own, but they can really guide you through that. And also there's different conservation programs through the Farm Bill that can help with the costs of installing the wetlands. We've really used the Conservation Reserve Program wetlands programs that reimburse the landowner for a lot of the construction costs and things like that. So that's key, I think, is working with soil and water in RCS.
Again, that was Maria Lemke. She's the Illinois Director of Conservation Science at the Nature Conservancy. During our interview, she mentioned farmer John Franklin from the Lexington area. I caught up with him by phone as well and asked him to explain a little bit about his involvement with the Nature Conservancy and what he has been doing on his farm.
Kind of got into farming a little bit later in life, so I'm actually in the electronics business as well. And then my dad had farmed, and before him, so it's the farm goes back to about 1850. And my dad had gotten out of farming, and then we had several people farming for us, and we had just an odd situation where two of them passed away within about 9 months of each other. And I've got a twin brother, and we said, well, if we ever wanted to get into farming, this is the time to do it. You're not telling somebody they have to leave the farm. Just the way the situation unfortunately worked, we had that window. And so we started farming about 600 acres. And, the farm had been no-till for a long time, and obviously we kept that up. There's a portion of the farm along the Mackinac River that is in cooperation with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm sure, you've talked to probably Maria or Krista about that. But down there, they're doing more experimenting with experimental wetlands, cover crops, and things like that. And so, probably 15 years ago or close to it, we put in 3 sets of wetlands, and they all had 3 wetlands, and they had measuring stations in each set of 3 in each of the 3 groups. And so they were measuring the effectiveness of each wetland in removing nitrates from the tile water. And as they went through those wetlands, they could kind of see what percentage was being reduced. And they've been doing then some experiments as well with cover crops and, just how not only the soil stabilization, but, kind of what percent coverage you get if you fly over the seed, over the standing corn crop and things like that. And if there's any added nitrogen from some of the cover crops they use.
Why so much interest from you, maybe your twin brother as well, in the conservation side?
That's a good question. I think I don't know, maybe growing up in the 60s and 70s when so many of those things had kind of become important. You had the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, and as corny as it sounds, you go back to the commercial with the Indian standing by the river with all the garbage in it. And so I don't know, there's part of it just maybe grew up that way, and the fact that the farm had been in the family for a long time. Obviously, you want to do what you can to, well, they preserve that, but maybe even better condition than it was when you got it. I think one of the questions is, maybe down the road there in your list of questions is what benefit do you get? And I'm not sure there's a dollar or a tangible benefit when what you're really doing is protecting the water downstream from you. So is it helping you, or is it just kind of a belief in that you need to do what you can to help the environment in general?
That's kind of where I was headed with you, was what your intention was in the process. I suppose, though, it does take money to put these in.
Absolutely.
Did you use cost share?
We had a lot of help from the FSA, so there's cost share in there in the ground that was taken out of production. Excuse me, those programs went into a CRP program, and there was, most of that construction was paid for in the constructed wetlands. We had some areas that were bottom ground that had not been farmed, so those were not eligible for any kind of a CRP program, but there was EQIP money to help build those at the time. If somebody had said, will you pay for this out of your own pocket and do it, that probably would have been kind of a hard conversation and maybe a hard thing to justify. So you certainly, I think, need the help of the government, particularly in a situation where it's may or may not be a direct benefit to you, but more of a benefit to the environment as a whole.
Did it change the flora, the fauna, the wildlife?
I think it did. I'm not a birder, so I didn't have an inventory of every bird that had been down there. But I think, whenever you have wetlands, and we've probably put a total of 20 or 20 acres or so into some different wetland programs, and another 50 or 60 acres into a prairie pollinator habitat. And there have been some species spotted there. I know there's a big Audubon convention in Springfield, and a bunch of people that were coming down from Chicago stopped at the farm to see a migrating bird, and I'm drawing a blank of which bird it was, but it was something that hadn't been seen very frequently. So, and we're also starting to see some bald eagles working their way up the Mackinac from the Illinois River, and maybe that's helped in part of that as well.
Anything else?
No, we haven't seen any bobcats or anything like that come up, or no apex predators. But we have too many deer. There are a ton of deer down there. But
And I meant in general. Anything else, but not just the wild.
Yeah. Anything else to say? No, not really. I just think it's. The overall goal was not necessarily to do something that would make us make money or even improve, but more to learn and to help everybody downstream.
John Franklin is a farmer from near Lexington, Illinois. That's along Interstate 55 to the north and west of Bloomington. Not very far from him, about 45 minutes or so. A little bit further up the road to the north and west is Sonneman, and that's the home of Jim Fulton, farmer. He also has a constructed wetland on his farm.
We have a 690-acre farm, which is built up over the years. My great-grandfather purchased the ground in 1893, and we've had 5 generations of Fultons here since. I'm going to be turning 65 here next month. I started out farming with my dad and my brother, and my dad had a heart attack and died in 1983, and then my brother and I took over and been farming here ever since. I was an ag teacher for a while, and then decided that I'd rather farm than teach, so I went back to farming again, and I've been on the 5 Mile Creek watershed, the Vermilion Headwaters Steering Committee, the school board here at the local school. I'm a township trustee and church treasurer and stewardship chairman, which I think has a lot to do with stewardship and conservation, I think, go together. As far as the practices we use on the farm, we've always had beef cattle, and so we've run a crop rotation with corn, beans, oats, hay, and wheat, kind of getting away from the wheat and maybe going more towards putting that money into cover crops. We use grass waterways. I have 2 fields that go up against 5 Mile Creek, so we run filter strips on both of those. I have a wetland restoration in CRP. We build a constructed wetland. I've put in some terraces. We use concrete block structures where the waterways enter the creeks. I've been working with cover crops the last few years, and we do all our nitrogen application in season. We side dress 32% after we put some on with the chemicals. We do strip till in corn and no till in beans.
Can you tell me a bit more about the constructed wetland project on the farm?
That came about because of being on the Vermilion Headwaters Steering Committee. I went to a meeting, and Jill and Jean from the Wetland Initiative came and put on a presentation, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. So I talked to them after the meeting, and they looked over my property on the plat book, and like I said, we have two fields that have the creek run by it, and so they came out and they looked them over and determined that one of them would be better than the other, and so we just went ahead and started working on the project.
How long did it take to build?
That was kind of amazing, really. They did what they called a Construction Conservation Expo, and so it was with the Illinois LICA land.
The Land Improvement Contractors Association.
Right. And so they they got dealers to donate machinery. Most of it was new machinery, and then we had people from all over the state came in, and they built us in about 5 days.
Do you know what it cost?
I had to pay, I think it was about $50,000, but that was given back to me in a grant from the Wetland Initiative. So my actual out-of-pocket costs probably was maybe $6,000 or $7,000, and most of that was dirt work, getting rid of the dirt. That was one thing that was kind of a surprise to me, how much dirt was left over. And so that was it took 2 years basically to get it all moved around. I used a lot of it on my property. I had some we put in some terraces and places and ravines that were starting to develop, and so one of my neighbors helped me do all that. So it took about 2 years to get rid of the dirt pile.
So you mentioned the Wetlands Initiative and LICA. Anyone else that helped? I mean, engineering, building, plant selection in the process, those sorts of things?
Well, we work with the NRCS. University of Illinois Crop Science helped sponsor it, the Illinois Soybean Association, American Farmland Trust, Springfield Plastics, Livingston County Soil and Water Conservation District, NRCS, Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, and I think that was all the different people that helped with it. Jill did, and her group did most of the work as far as permits and applications and all that stuff. I really didn't do much. They kind of, once I gave them the go-ahead, they came in and they took over and they worked directly with the NRCS. I would just sign forms.
All well and good and easy enough.
Right.
Does it work? Are you seeing benefits?
We're kind of still in the process to waiting and see. They've got one box at the inlet of the wetland and one at the outlet, so they can measure the nitrate levels when they come in and when they can go out. And a grad student from the University of Illinois is collecting the data and that. We just got that set up right at the end of summer, and so I think that process of where they're going to be able to regularly get the readouts is going to start here in the spring. Usually
these are on fairly small watershed sizes. Do you know how many acres are in the total watershed and how many acres are now in the constructed wetland?
The drainage area is for 73 acres. The total project size is 4.8 acres. The actual wetland is 1.1 acres. And then there's a buffer area of 2.45 acres that's it's not all planted to pollinator yet, but it will be as soon as I can get out there and get it in the ground. I'm ready to do that now. It's got 3 water control structures. My neighbor to the north of me had pattern tiled his field, and he had run a 12-inch main down to my creek. And so we put one water control structure in his 12-inch main, and then I've got an 8-inch that comes down my waterway, and there's a water control structure in it, and they both feed then into the wetland, and then there's a third one at the outlet, so we can control how much water is in the wetland at any given time by inserting or taking out boards.
Any advice for producers, farmers, landowners that are interested in maybe considering a constructed wetland?
Part of the reason I wanted to do it was the wildlife habitat. Also concerned about all the nitrogen that's leaving our farmland here in Illinois and heading down to the Gulf, and I thought maybe it was time that somebody should do something, try to stop some of that.
Jim Fulton is a farmer from near Sonneman, Illinois, and has been telling us a bit about his constructed wetland. You've been listening to episode 33 of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Podcast. Are these tools in your toolbox? A constructed wetland. The program was produced in conjunction with Illinois Extension Watershed Outreach Associates, Jennifer Jones, and Rachel Curry. I'm Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.